Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding another hearing on this topic. We were here last month talking with the Secretary of Homeland Security, your boss, and also talking to the FBI Director and the counterterrorism folks about this very topic. And I think it's clear that we live in a dangerous world, and it's something we have to be concerned about, not just on the refugee program, but all these various entry points. One, of course, is the visa waiver program. We talked about the fact that there are 5,000 foreign fighters who come from these 38 countries with which we have a visa waiver arrangement. That's a huge risk. And I think it is appropriate that this committee focus on tightening up those standards. I know there are a couple of legislative proposals floating out there now, and we'd love to have your input on that today. We also, of course, have to worry about visas. I mean, the 9/11 terrorists came here, overstayed their visas. We didn't know who they were, where they were. That's an immigration reform issue. Legal immigrants, we have foreign fighters ourselves. And we've had some that have come back to my home state of Ohio. One came back to Columbus, Ohio, and plotted to commit terrorist acts in the United States and was arrested for it. It's happening. We, of course, have the issue of illegal entry. This morning we hear about the 5 individuals who were stopped in Honduras with fake Syrian passports, and then we have apparently a couple of families on the Mexican border this morning. And this is a problem, and this goes to our need to have a secure border, not just for immigration purposes, but for money, guns, drugs, and certainly for terrorism. And then homegrown terrorists. My hometown of Cincinnati, we have one person currently incarcerated under arrest for wanting to come to this Capitol, to blow us up here. And in Akron this month, we had a homegrown terrorist arrested. This is in Ohio, the heartland. So this is a very real issue, but I don't think we should ignore the refugee side of it either. Let me tell you a story, and maybe you can tell me that this is something that could never happen under the current program. But there were a couple of brothers who were brought in as refugees from Iraq, not Syria, but from Iraq. And they were in the heartland, right across the river from where I live in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And recently, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed their conviction for terrorist activities, including providing assistance to al-Qaeda in Iraq. They also were taped saying that they wanted to build a bomb in the United States to kill a U.S. Army captain in the United States. And they were quoted as saying, quote, "Many things should take place and it should be huge." These were refugees. And so this notion that somehow we need to worry about all these other issues, but it's okay in the refugee program, of course we need to know who's coming in. And we need to be sure we not only know who they are, but what their intentions are. And with regard to these Iraqi refugees who came in, they had been fingerprinted at the border in Syria, because they had to go through Syria to come from Iraq. They had been entered into a biometric database maintained by U.S. intelligence. Yet when they applied for refugee status and were checked by DHS, your department, FBI, Department of Defense, they came in clean and were admitted to the United States. So later they bragged about what they had done to attack and kill U.S. soldiers in Iraq. They weren't picked up. My concern, which was something that came forward in our last hearing here on October 8th in this room, where again we had your boss, FBI Director, counterterrorism officials. They told us point blank, we do not have the intelligence in Syria to be able to do the appropriate background checks. Here's the quote from Director Comey, the FBI Director. In response to asking about our gaps in intelligence collection and sharing process that pose great risk, he said, "Senator, to me, there is a risk associated with bringing anybody in from the outside, but especially from a conflict zone like that. My concern there is that there are certain gaps I do not want to talk about publicly in the data that is available to us." End quote. You said something similar this morning. You can't talk in open session about the gaps we have. But obviously, we don't have intelligence on the ground there. We've just sent 50 special forces there. That's great. They're not there to collect data on refugees. So I do think it's a concern. I do think we have to tighten it up. And I think if we do not, we are ignoring one of the, agreed, many other threats, some of which may be greater threats in the sense of numbers of people. But for us to stand here and say we're somehow against refugees because we think there ought to be proper checks in place, that's ridiculous. We are the most generous country in the world, and thank God we are. And I, along with my colleagues, I think on both sides of the aisle, are strongly in support of the refugee resettlement programs. But let's be darn sure that we don't have another situation as we had in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in a case where, unfortunately, because we don't have intelligence on the ground, we have even less information than we did with regard to the Iraqis? Your response?
A lot has, since the Bowling Green case, a lot has been done to upgrade the security check system. I've heard it certainly said by others that those individuals would have in fact been picked up under the kind of biographic screening that we do now. Nothing of what I'm saying should be seen as contrary to what either Secretary Johnson or Director Comey did. There is in fact risk in what we do. What I am saying is that we engage in the sort of process with redundancies, with abundant resources, with highly trained officers to keep those risks to an absolute minimum.